All right, we're gonna get started with just a few announcements. So you're at a WiD Wednesday, which is put on by Women in Design at the BSA. We organize events to feature projects designed or led by women in the Boston area. And this one in particular is really special because it has both a women-led design team and construction team. Before we get into tonight's events, I just want to make a few announcements about upcoming BSA and Women in Design events. The BSA just announced the Intersections Symposium that's happening this November, and Intersections, Equity, Environment, and the City is a hybrid symposium from November 6th to 13th, centered around intersectional and participatory design processes. So I'm going to put the link for that in the chat. Registration is just about to open. I will also add that if you are a frequent attendee of these events, we are interested in connecting with others that are interested in hosting these events and presenting a project of their own at them. So feel free to reach out to Kaylee and myself. We are the co-chairs for the Design and Networking Committee and organize these. So about tonight, we will be offering AIA credits. We'll put a link for those about halfway through the presentation in the chat. So you just click on the link and you can put in your AIA number. We will also be receiving questions in the chat function. So instead of interrupting the presenters, just type your question in the chat and Kaylee and I will interject at an appropriate time so we don't catch anyone mid-thought. So that's how we're going to do questions tonight. We'll also have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. All right, over to Kaylee. She's going to introduce our presenters.
So tonight we're pleased to have Fennick, McCredie, and Consigli presenting the YWCA of Central Mass. We are excited to bring you this project tonight virtually, and our presenters tonight are Deborah Fennick, she's the principal at Fennick McCredie, Katie O'Donoghue, project designer at Fennick McCredie, Melissa Valancourt, project manager at Fennick McCredie, Jody Stark, project executive at Consigli, Janice Narowski, superintendent from Consigli, and Andrea Baham, assistant project manager at Consigli. And you guys can take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Women in Design for hosting this hour and a half. So tonight we're going to be presenting an amazing and very impactful mission-driven organizations project, but we're also going to be telling the story of a women-led project, a project by women for women. Very exciting. It was a very exciting project to be involved with. So next slide, Melissa. So first, for a little background on the project, this was a 74,000 square foot renovation of a multi-use building. It was purpose-built for the YWCA. I'm going to refer to it as YW, as were my colleagues. And it was the building was constructed in 1961, so this was built by that 130-year-old organization for the purpose of the mission of the YWCA. It has historic value as a significant mid-century example of mid-century modern architecture. So because of that, we were able to, through the project, get National Historic designation so that we could capture state and national historic tax credits. This again was a women-led team, starting with the organization itself, the YWCA, from the board to its leadership team, its department heads, and throughout the organization, women were women-led. The OPM was a woman-founded organization, Pink and Company, who is now Answer Advisory. There are several consultants that were women businesses, the Historic Preservation Consultant, the Capital Campaign Advisor, We are a women business enterprise, and we brought a team with us of sub-consultants, many also women businesses. And when we transferred to the pre-construction and construction phase, Consigli brought an astonishing leadership roster, which you'll see later, and really pushed the envelope for including diversity in trade participation. Quite an excellent example of that. So we're looking at a slide right now that shows the YWCA in its urban context. It's right downtown. It is a 5-minute walk from the rail station. Next door is the public library, theater. City Hall is a block and a half away. The Central Business District is just a little bit north of that. And across the railroad tracks to the downside of the page is the emerging very hot location of the Canal District, and which has many interesting historic buildings that have been repurposed and captured as destinations, as well as the Polar Park, the Red Sox WuSox Stadium. Next slide. So I also like to talk about, put a pin in this time, the time that this project took place. The project kickoff for this was just a few weeks after the Women's March. The Women's March was a point in time where there was a lot of contemplation, there's a lot of concern, there was a lot of soul seeking about what we could do as people, as women, as architects, and in this environment, new political and social environment. What could we do to make a difference? And the YW project certainly was a project that gave many of us purpose and aligned with the values that architects bring to projects. Next slide. Okay, and so we're going to get a little insights into the mission of the YWCA, and no better person to talk about that than the executive director of the YW.
The vision of the renovation was to make the facility safe, secure, accessible, and comfortable, as well as honoring the people who we serve. They deserved state-of-the-art childcare space at the top quality measures. Our residents deserved appropriate space to make it their home. And then our members and participants, and equally importantly, our staff, deserved space conducive to the work that they needed to do, and that people came to the YWCA to be served. So we knew we had some opportunities. Could we really make this a signature project by women, for women, about women and people of color? I am so proud of the work and the space that we have to offer our staff and our participants and clients and members.
This is a really special organization, and we're very proud to have worked with them and supported them. I'd like to start off talking about their strategic plan, which they developed a couple of years before this project, and it was a strategic plan for the whole the operations of the whole organization. Did address their facilities, but it was primarily looking at the whole picture. 75-page document, very comprehensive, very smart. It started off with their from these diagrams, the top right of the slide, with their mission statement and how the mission statement became impacted the organization through time. The other, just below that one, is the facilities plan. It was followed several plans about all of their departments and defined, what their plan for the next 5 years was, which included this project. And then they also had a document called their strategy screen, which was a really amazing way of analyzing their initiatives, measuring it against the criteria, their strategic criteria. This is something that was used particularly in the beginning of our project as a filter for developing the program for this project. Next slide. Yeah, so just I'm going to give a little background here. The project was initially defined as a comprehensive upgrade of the whole building, addressing code and accessibility deficiencies, total systems replacement. Since 1961, there hadn't been any major renovations of the project, of the building itself, and a general refresh of the entire building. It was estimated a construction cost of between $10 and $12 million, depending on whether, depending sort of on the extent of reconsidering the design of the spaces. And it was also conceived of as a single-phased occupied renovation. So they had vital services at this location, and they needed to operate throughout construction. So we're looking at the existing conditions plans as the basis of the project, and you can see there are several different entities. There's domestic violence services, women's economic empowerment, their facilities, their health and wellness facilities, including the pool and the gym and other spaces. A very important early education component, which was highly utilized by the community, administration, and other elements. And so these diagrams show you how they're disposed throughout, those elements are disposed throughout the building. And we see the historic components of this mid-century modern building that were identified, and elements that needed preservation as the project went forward. Next slide. So we developed several optional ways of organizing the facilities. Option 2A was the winner of where some of the key elements of this renovation in terms of layout were upgrading of the early education facility, bringing it up to current standards. Also, and that was one of the more significant moves within the building, expanding the domestic violence services so they could serve the whole region. And then just a general reorganization of the building to better serve their departments. Next slide. And there's a diagram of the organization of the program in section with the housing, the transitional housing, the upper two levels. The middle level is, which is brown here, is the administration, and then childcare in the front wing is on the first floor and the ground floor with the athletic facilities, the pool caught in this section also. So with that, I'd like to pass this on to Melissa to talk about design.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Deborah. So as Deborah mentioned, there was this fabulous strategic plan that kind of came to us when we were awarded this project. And between that and several other documents and need assessment prepared by Pink & Company, as well as just existing drawings and reports over the course of years, we dove into our pre-design process. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of the components of that. Seeing that there were several departments and user groups sort of making up the YW as a whole, we made sure that we sat down with representatives from every single department whether, everything from field documenting file cabinets and desk space requirements to also just sitting down, listening and understanding what the individual missions and goals were of these departments. So beyond sort of physical quantification of stuff and space needs, it's also understanding operational needs and aspirations of the different departments. So it's something I just wanted to mention here, that there was sort of a very multifaceted and pretty extensive programming process that that we worked through. And I think through that process, we gained a deeper appreciation for the complex nature of the YWCA. So not only does the YW have a really strong mission that we've talked about quite a bit, each department and each program that makes up the YW, that's a part of the YW, has their own little role within that. So as we started to develop space plans and design concepts, we had to make sure that we were understanding the balance between the different needs and unique qualities of these different groups. So I'm going to go to the next slide and just talk a little bit about sort of the challenge that brings. So there's a limited budget, there's limited square footage. We weren't adding on to this building at all. And there's a lot of, there are a lot of requests and a lot of desires and a lot of dreams. So fortunately, we were able to look back at what Deborah mentioned is that strategy screen document, sort of use it as a prioritization criteria. So we could start to vet different requests and start to, help the YW make some of these decisions that are, really sometimes uncomfortable to make, because you may have demands from one department that might mean something gets sacrificed somewhere else. But together, I think we created sort of this toolkit, this robust toolkit, whether it was, data collection tools, understanding the weight of certain requirements, the necessity of certain requirements, or whether things were maybe just nice to have. So through this process, I think we actually kind of created tools with the YW to help track and also help understand and make decisions. Let's see. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Another client of sorts that I think is definitely worth mentioning is we had to answer to a lot of grant and funding sources as well. So although we had the YW as our primary client, the project came together because of this amazing, network of funds and grants. And the folks over at Pink & Company, the OPM, really led an amazing effort in pulling a lot of these grants together into the forefront. And us as the architects and also the construction management team, we had a lot of tracking to do and a lot of, special breakout submissions and requirements to keep track of. And I think it's worth noting as well that, among the 9 or so funding sources, each one came with a series of rules and standards and expectations for anything from square footage requirements or very, very specific design elements, like a glazing panel into a laundry room, that's required. There's very specific things that are tied to some of these that you really need to keep track of as you move through the process. I think one of the more interesting and more complex funding sources is the EEOST, which is the childcare related funding source and component of the project. And I'm going to hand it over to Katie, who's going to talk a little bit about that childcare component.
Thank you, Melissa. So the childcare space is really sort of the best case study for the added complexity of the grants. And for this one, we pursued the EEOST grant, which is early education out of school time, and is definitely one of the more complex and regulated grants in terms of their requirements for program. It's administered by the Children's Investment Fund and EEC, the Mass Department of Early Education and Care. And we were awarded the highest award, which is $1 million. So that was the single largest grant source on this project. So the EEC draws from a number of sources for their requirements. One of them is QRAS, which is typically an optional rating scale. It's a quality rating and improvement scale. And it provides recommendations for operations and physical space of daycare centers. And it's used as a tool to provide guidance for programs and make sure that they're providing consistent, high quality childcare between centers, and can often be used based on their rating, sort of as a selling point of the quality of the childcare center. So it's on a scale of 1 to 4. At the start of this project, the YW had a 3, and in order to be a really good contender for the grant, they had to go up to a 4. Another item was the design guidelines that are compiled by EEC. So they provide guidelines for the physical space of the childcare center based on classroom shape and size, square footage requirements, design features, access, teacher supervision, make sure it's designed so that it's easily supervised by staff. And really for any of these grants, but especially for the EEOST grant, the requirements are often above and beyond what's required by code or the wants and needs of the owners or their user groups. And it definitely helped further define the required program for the childcare space beyond all of the interviews and things we had done previously. Next slide, Melissa. So this is the demo plan. So the childcare space is highlighted in blue. It was entirely on the ground floor. So one of the biggest deficiencies, of the 2 biggest deficiencies, one was room size. You'd see they were all to code, but they were inefficient. You can see in the top sort of right corner, those are 2 preschool rooms that would typically hold the maximum of 20 students each, but they were sized probably 50 to 75% larger than they really needed to be. And while having a large childcare room is a great benefit to the space typically, it meant that there was sort of the square footage allocation wasn't great, and it meant that there were things in the program that they weren't able to fit in, where there was space for staff, offices, storage space, things like that. And the other big deficiency was the lack of daylight. So there are, where Melissa's highlighting, there were 2 rooms that had no windows. The site sloped sort of from plan south to north, sloped down. So there's opportunity for windows on the north and west sides. But between those 2 classrooms and the one next to those preschool rooms, there were no windows, so no daylight, no fresh air. So if you go to the next slide. These are some photos of their original space. So there's always a huge need for storage in daycare spaces, and just really needed a refresh. And just programmatically, the toilets were accessed from the corridor, which meant the teacher needs to leave the room to bring the kid to the toilet, and can create supervision issues, and it's not very efficient. You can go to the next slide. These are some images of their original playground. So from a very practical standpoint, the sand was a bit of a maintenance issue. They would have to rake it a lot and refill it. The teachers would often have to go out there and before they letting the kids out and go look for cans or trash or something. But it was also facing, you see in the bottom left corner, facing a very, very busy intersection. And it was surrounded by chain link fence with barbed wire, and it just doesn't have that sort of bright, sort of child-friendly quality to it. Go to the next slide. So this is our new plan. Our goal in general, so we wanted to make a bright, refreshed, child-friendly space, but it's also really crucial that we provided a space that was clean and safe for these kids. One of the biggest changes, probably programmatically throughout the building, was shifting the childcare to 2 floors rather than 1 floor. So it is organized so that the infant and toddler spaces are on the 1st floor just off the lobby, and provides, apologize for my dog, some supervision from the front desk. And domestic violence and gang disputes are a reality and a concern for the client. So this helped provide more supervision as they're coming in the door with kids. But we still want it to be sort of bright and welcoming for kids as well. We also were able to right size the classroom so that we could use that extra square footage, because we couldn't expand the building at all, use that extra square footage for additional program for staff and storage needs. And then the biggest, most obvious change is the increase in daylight to these spaces. So by bringing the childcare spaces to the 1st floor, they have these great big floor to ceiling windows that in the original, not in the original, but in the renovation in the 80s, the bottom panel was solid. So replacing that with full height glass made a huge difference in the openness of the space. And then on the ground floor, we were able to provide a light well between the building and the playground so that we could actually enlarge a window and make sure that everyone had access to operable windows in daylight. The next slide. So the EOST brought a lot of challenges, programmatic needs. The biggest one out of anything was actually plumbing. So they one of the deal breakers in order to be a good contender for the grant was to have 4 sinks per classroom. That was 2 for children. So one an activity sink for crafts or hand washing, and then 1 toileting sink associated with the bathroom. And then also 2 for staff. So they have an activity or food prep sink and a diapering sink, and they have to be located physically separate from each other. Of course, we had to have 1 per classroom that was also accessible, which took up a lot of square footage, and we had very limited real estate to deal with. So it was a lot. We had a small amount of space to try and fit in a lot of fixtures and associated casework. And our solution, particularly for the preschool and toddler spaces, were the sort of Jack and Jill configuration. So based on occupancy for preschoolers, there are 10 to 20 kids per class. We had 2 shared toilets between the classrooms that were accessible from both classrooms. And then in the kindergarten or pre-K, we're able to do 1 accessible toilet in the corner of each room. But they have these 4-foot high walls, so they always have supervision. In the shared toilets between the classrooms, you did provide glass between the diapering area and the toilet itself to provide some level of separation between them. They are quite open otherwise. And then for the activity sinks, we did sort of a trough sink that becomes a little bit of a play feature for kids instead of typical sinks, and as well as some casework for staff. Go to the next slide. And then for the playground, one of the biggest benefits of splitting them up on 2 floors was the ability to access the playgrounds directly from their classrooms. So with the site sloping down sort of west to east, we were able to terrace the playgrounds. So they were separated from each other, and they have the toddler playground to the left and the preschool playground just above the building. And it created a nice physical separation with large retaining walls between the playgrounds and the public space, and also separation from the traffic. This is quite a busy street, as well as the physically moving it from the intersection side of the building closer towards the library, which is a little bit quieter and a different scale. And then the more sort of subtle implied privacy of using a green screen around all the public sides of the playgrounds, with arborvitae and vines that are growing up the fence.
Okay, so as we were going through design, 2 major things happened. The first is we were doing the programming and design and exploring the opportunities of redesign, and always constantly measuring these things against their screen, their strategic screen, the value to the organization and what they were trying to accomplish. The project went from essentially an upgrade of the 1961 building that had actually had some renovations in the 80s, but just very strategic ones. So it moved from that kind of project to really to rethinking of the organization of the building. As Katie described, what happened to the childcare area, which was one of the more dramatic rethinking of it. And with that, the cost went from the budget grew again. As things became priorities to the YW, they increased the budget. So it grew from like a $12 million to a $16 million project. They became a little more bullish about the capital campaign and their ability to make this work. So that was the first major thing that was happening through the design process. The second is, again, their costs were based on non-union open shop trades participating in the project. And over time, they realized how important the unions were to enabling more diverse, more exposure to diverse groups, to minorities and to women, bringing them into the trades. So they wanted to pursue with this project and pursue their CM procurement with a union aligned CM. So that increased the budget from 16 million to 19, 20 million. So the first big task this project had to address was in pre-construction services was realigning the project without losing anything that supported their mission, realigning the project back down to closer to the $16 million project. And at this, I will hand it off to Jody.
All right, thanks, Deborah. So as Deborah noted, we were brought on actually before CM selection to help the YW and Fennick with the applications for some of these grants that they were applying for. So we also came in at the time that they were making the decision between, non-union open shop and union contractors. So we brought those numbers in, and then we helped in a very early preliminary value management standpoint to try and bring it back down to the 16 million and help them from a scheduling, logistics, and particularly phasing standpoint, because this was a very complicated, phased, occupied renovation. So while we had some exposure to the project early on, we knew that they still had to go out for CM selection, and just having that knowledge wasn't going to be enough. So we knew that we were going to have to get really creative in terms of what our phasing and logistics would be. And we looked at it as an opportunity to align directly with the mission of the client. I know people have mentioned, the mission of empowering women and eliminating racism. And this project ironically aligned with the timing of my promotion to project executive, because at the time I was the only one. So we started looking at it, and I said, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we could provide a team of entirely female management team? And I started looking at it and got more and more excited, because I realized in most positions I had multiple options. They were unfortunately stuck with me, but I had multiple options for all of the other roles. So not only were we able to put together a team of women, as you can see here, it's a team of diverse women. And that really spoke to the client and their mission. And we were really proud to be able to put that together. And we had all worked together individually on different projects, but never all one in the same project. So we were really, really excited, and ultimately were awarded the project. So with that, if we go to the next slide, Melissa, as Deb was mentioning, the client's goal of having union subcontractors on the job was really about providing a living wage to the people in the community, helping to promote minority, people of color, women, and local residents in the workforce. So as part of this project, we were actually also able to sign Worcester's first community benefits agreement to be able to commit to some of these percentages. And also, they also had a component for apprenticeships, so that there was training built into this job. There was a certain amount of apprenticeships required, so that we could bring more people into the trades and start building up that next generation. And with these, we beat all of the goals we had set forth from a minority and women workforce standpoint, as you can see here. And we also tracked local workforce. There wasn't a set percentage that we were shooting for here, but we were really pleased with the 50% number. And while 4% or 3% may not seem like a very big deal from a numbers statistics standpoint, from a workforce standpoint, these are really, really great numbers that we are very proud of hitting. We try to do this on all of our jobs, but again, having it be on this type of job with this type of mission made it even more special. We go to the next one. So as everybody's been talking, obviously budget, it's a nonprofit. They want to put all of their work or their dollars into work that's going to support their programs. So from a VM standpoint, value management standpoint, we focused really a lot of effort into ways that we could improve the project without eliminating program and things that they needed. So one of the biggest things that we did is we probably resequenced this job a dozen times. Originally, it was a 15-month job. Some of the residences that you saw earlier, we were only going to be able to take 4 rooms at a time, and the women were going to be living there while we moved them around. Even all the office spaces, the childcare, everything was going to be moving around as we were taking over different spaces. And as we finished, they would bring the new program in. We got creative, and the Worcester community stepped up, and we were able to find rooms for the women in the residences at Becker College. So they stayed for the summer, and we shifted that portion of the job to a summer slammer. So instead of 6 months that it would have taken to build those 2 floors and renovate it, it took us 12 weeks. So that saved, 4 months on the schedule. We did a couple other resequencing, and I know, Fennick and their consultants spent a lot of time and effort looking at different ways we could do things like the mechanical systems, or other things that, again, stuff that you weren't going to see necessarily, but then we could leave the dollars into what would make the biggest impact.
Yeah, and I guess to just sort of tack on to that real quick, I think it was helpful, again, that we were able to refer back to that prioritization, like that core document, the strategy screen, because when, no one wants to make these decisions and they can't be arbitrary. So it was really important that we collectively were able to look at, the values, the estimates, and the, provided by Consigli throughout this process, and say, okay, well, we can save X amount of dollars if we defer the envelope repairs. And, with having Consigli on board and having a really, I think, collaborative environment, which was really remarkable with them throughout this process, did a little more field investigation and found that, the envelope wasn't in quite as much disrepair as we had thought. And we were able to defer that and also look at the fact that, the envelope, the condition of the envelope wasn't impacting the ability of the YW to complete their mission. So on this slide, we have sort of some of those elements from that strategy screen document where things are weighted differently. You can see the kind of the dots. So it's like, will this item advance the mission consistent with the core values of the YW? Does it contribute to the central Massachusetts community? So those sorts of things, those aren't impeded by the envelope repair, because the envelope wasn't failing. It just could be reported at some point. So it helped us prioritize and shift what scope items were going to be, kept intact and what were going to be adjusted. The locker rooms were greatly dialed back because originally we had a lot of money going into those upgrades, but instead we found a way to just make a few key upgrades that would provide family restrooms and, non-gender assigned changing rooms. So, really kind of bring the YW to where it needs to be at this day and age. It's not just a male and a female locker room anymore. So to provide little breakout spaces that would satisfy all different types of users and be much more accessible, which is part of the essential mission to the YW. So I guess that's.
Yeah, and I would say it was a collective focus to make sure that the things we were suggesting aligned with that mission. And I'll say the YW themselves was a very accommodating client in that, if we wanted to try and take over other spaces, when the pandemic hit and people were sent home to work from there, they were still operating their childcare center for first responders, but the office staff was working from home. So we looked and we said, could we get into some of these other areas earlier? And like I said, we resequenced the job so many times and took advantage of every opportunity we could find to either build things faster or more efficiently so that we could save the costs and put the money into the building. So the next slide, this is maybe my favorite pictures of my entire career, in that these are the architects, the OPMs, the women from the YW and the Consigli team. This, I'm so grateful that the groundbreaking was able to happen in January of 2020 before the pandemic hit, so that we could have this documentation of what this project team is. And I can honestly say we could take this picture at the end, and actually we did take this picture at the end of the job too. So this is not just smiling faces at the beginning of the job and everybody still liked each other. At the end, it was exactly the same. And, you know, we bought those signs, the women working sign. I made sure, you know, that I bought one so that I could have it in my garage, because it's just, everybody had that sense of pride, an opportunity in what this job was and what it represented for not only ourselves, but also the client. And we were really thrilled to be a part of it. So with that, I want to make sure to turn it over to Janice and Andrea to give a few thoughts about living through the project in the field in the middle of the pandemic.
Thanks, Jody. I just wanted to really highlight the fact that as a women-led project team, construction management, and everything going on in the field at the time, we came in with a very unique perspective, being wives and mothers, sisters, that we could take into account the mission of the YW and the needs of the programming, particularly the childcare, in order to schedule the construction activities and the logistics of everything that had to be done to complete the project on time, and still manage to keep the client happy, make sure their programming needs were met, and, you know, essentially childcare really didn't get affected so much by the construction. So with construction in mind, we're gonna hand it over to Janice. She really was the lead on the logistics planning in the field.
I was gonna say, I'm just gonna tie together a couple thoughts that have already been mentioned here. Lots of different phasing, lots of different systems. It started from the beginning, all these different areas. During the pre-construction, when we were reevaluating the design, reevaluating how things were gonna tie together, we did a huge HVAC overhaul with the entire team, FMA and all their consultants, and broke down the HVAC to fit kind of the phasing we worked out with the YW. So everyone worked together to kind of redesign things that were going to limit the impact later on. We're going to allow us to better finish the spaces in totality and not have to go back and be in occupied spaces, making connections and making fittings. So it was a full team approach right from the start. And then right as we went through, as we were doing inspections for all these different zones, we were able to have systems that had been thought about ahead of time and could be tied in, turned over all together. Existing conditions were rough. As Andrea was just saying, we were working all these different departments. Deborah highlighted childcare, the gym, the fitness center, the women living upstairs. We had to do shutdowns here. You couldn't turn off water when they wanted to shower. You couldn't lose the hand wash sinks during the pandemic. You know, we were trying to time, lighting would go out when the kids were taking a nap. There was lots of things that were very interactive and very different about this project that just kept us all going and kept us on our toes. But the open communication, that was my biggest and favorite takeaway of the project, is coming in with the all-female construction team, all-female design team, other than a couple consultants, but the owner's team, OPM, like there was a general baseline of trust that went in right at the beginning. None of us were out to prove anything. We didn't have to show ourselves. That, like, it was just a different dynamic with everyone coming in towards the same mission, and the collaboration started a lot sooner and continued right through the project. So we were all, as these things came up, you know, with the pandemic or with these design changes, we found more water damage in the locker rooms. You know, we started locker rooms sooner because they closed because of the pandemic. All these adjustments, the team just jumped in and handled it and issued new drawings and revised the schedule and updated things. And we all rolled together, and there was just it was more efficient process based on just an early dynamic that we'd brought together, and it was fantastic. Kind of understated thing that you don't really think about till the end of the project, but it was great when we were building it.
And now we're going to show you the final product. You've seen a lot of sketches and diagrams and charts, and here's the finished product with some, you know, existing or formerly existing conditions and or historic photographs or sketches. So the front of the building, right now, actually the site work for the front of the building, which got its funding a little bit late, and so it's being constructed a little bit late, is happening right now. So we'll have better images to show the front. But the major element that happened, there was some repair, facade repair, but window replacement was pretty impactful change on the building, both in its performance and aesthetics. And we used as a guide the historic photographs actually of the building, replicated the mullion patterns, but with those revised mullion patterns and stuff, we had different functionality to the windows. We needed to have greater ventilation in the transitional housing units and things like that. So that was a big challenge to bring it back. But so the image on the left side is probably is showing the 80s window replacement, which were dark mullion windows. You can see air conditioners sticking in them. Obviously, that's all cleaned up. And these, we went back to the original color for the mullions. Melissa, did you want to add anything on this one?
Well, no, I guess it was a lot of historic back and forth to get these windows to pass muster. But and one other thing about the existing windows that were from the 80s, they were basically like guillotine. So it was really good that we got those out of there, because that was one of the things they would just drop. And, so now we've got nice, safe, smooth operating windows, which is really important. That's it.
Next slide. So here are a couple of historic photos and a sketch from the 60s. And I think what impressed us when we saw this, we immediately had a vision for what this, what the design, what direction the design should take. I mean, that large image there looks like a hotel lobby with soft furniture and the fire in the fireplace. This was something that was important to the YWCA in the 60s and really resonated with the current group there to create. They want their lobby to be welcoming for everyone to feel that they're, that they can go in there and feel safe and feel accommodated. And so there's like no magnetometers or anything like that at the front door. This is a welcoming place. So that was an aesthetic that became a driver for the renovation of the lobby space. So this shows that same space. There's the fireplace you can see off on the right. It is in a room. There was a room that was installed here, just that's a part, necessary for the functioning of the lobby. But it has this transparency and direction, so that fireplace still has a presence in the lobby. If you look just behind the plant, you can see the floating stair, which we'll see photos of it in a couple of minutes. One of the great features of this mid-century modern building, the floating stair, and also the transparency between the lobby and the swimming pool. And so, or natatorium, so you could see actually from standing waiting at the desk, you can look to your right and actually see through to the pool. Elevator is just to the left of the column, and donor wall and additional space for hanging out in the lobby for vending machines and tables and that sort of thing. And then a reconceived of reception desk that presented itself directly to somebody walking in to the lobby, as opposed to sort of sideways, which was what the 1980s desk lobby design presented to visitors. So yeah, next slide. So here we've just turned to the left, and now we're looking, the reception desk would be to our right if the pictures scanned out. We're looking at the historic mailboxes that were relocated into this location, and to create a dynamic, friendly, warm, sort of animated entry to the childcare area. We incorporated this wallpaper which is in sort of mid-century modern style, although it is contemporary, It's in that style and with the colors we find in mid-century modern buildings. You see what that threshold looked like prior to our renovation in the small image on the left side. Next. And here is that floating stair, the iconic mid-century modern intervention or in many mid-century lobbies. There's a sketch by the original architect off on the left of the floating stair, and you can see that the stair provides communication, easy communication between the lobby and the second floor, and great views of the entire swimming pool. And if you look way to the back wall of that natatorium, you can see a garden space outside the windows, that window wall that's enclosed. It's a small garden that's enclosed by a brick wall. Very mid-century modern move, to have that kind of connectivity, but from the lobby to the, to the pool, all the way outside, connecting to the outside. And Melissa, do you want to talk about our code challenges with this one?
Yeah, it's just really worth noting that there was a lot of time spent to keep the stair intact. It obviously is sort of the showpiece in terms of the interiors from the historic perspective, and does not meet really much of what is currently required from the accessibility code. So we're fortunate that the layout of the building already had a fire stair like directly adjacent to this. So we did not need the stair at all for any sort of life safety or egress requirements. It was really an ornamental and communicating stair, and it was used quite a bit for that as well, just to get quickly up to the offices on the second floor. So it ended up, if anyone's interested in this kind of stuff, I ended up getting we had to get 7 individual variances just associated with this stair. But I think, with the support of our code consultants and the owner, and actually, the Worcester Accessibility Board wrote a memo of support, we were able to, sort of comfortably, I think, pass that along and keep the stair as is for the building. So it's just another little tidbit.
You want to do the next slide, Melissa?
Sure. This is the auditorium, and interestingly enough, we actually did not do much work here at all. But it's a beautiful space, and I think sort of maybe what's hidden here is that it ended up that the ceramic tile that's lining the walls in this pool, it's really distinctive and pretty cool. It's a neat teal color. Was historically significant. It was deemed historically significant. So back in 1961, it was available and easy to get, but not now. And it would have been extremely expensive. But once you touch it and it's considered historic, you're obligated to restore it and bring it. So it was getting very pricey. So instead, we had, I think, kind of a clever workaround, and all of those murals, large photographs that you see along the right of this photograph, which is the exterior wall. The YW provided imagery, and sort of together we ended up with these large format boards that are kind of concealing the tile, so that later on, if it ends up becoming something that can be restored, it's still able to be. But in the meantime, it's a safe space, and honestly, it adds a wonderful punch of color. It kind of is offset by the orange you can see up in the gallery space. So it really kind of tied the project together, and it ended up really being a way to value manage something out.
Yeah, we love the brand color tangerine lane dividers in the pool, which add some great color to the space also. And as Melissa said, we're looking on the left, you can look up into the fitness area. Again, that color brings the eye into that space. That space was separated with that glass wall in the 80s, part of the 80s renovations for controlling the environment, the pool environment, separating the pool environment from the fitness area. Here's another historic sketch showing the intent of connection between this upper level, which had some stadium seating, and the pool. and it still operates that way, but it has the environmental control that's needed. Next slide. These are the transitional housing single resident occupancy rooms. They're like dorm rooms. You can see through the window how connected this facility is to its community. You can see the city outside from both sides of the building. You can see the windows, the replacement windows, many, the other things that were stuck in the windows and the dark mullions are much different and much better frame with this, the replacement windows that we have here. And then some of the common space is shown on the right slide. And this is got the historic fireplace. You can just see a little glimpse of on the far right. Katie, would you like to talk about these?
Interrupt here for just 1 second, just to be cognizant of everyone's time. We're at 7 o'clock, so I think we have maybe about 5-10 more minutes of these wonderful photographs. Is that about right? But if anyone is dying to ask questions, feel free to send them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll be posting a link again. But yeah, please stay on for questions after the presentation as well. Thanks.
Okay, Katie, you want to?
Yeah, so this is an image both for the existing and the new, one of the ground floor childcare spaces. So we were able to, there wasn't a lot of historic context in the ground floor, so it was basically a gut renovation. We could play with it and be a little fun and able to raise the ceiling in some areas and provide some fun lighting and to draw from that the mid-century inspired wallpaper and bring some pops of color down to the childcare space. Go to the next slide. And these are infant toddler room on the first floor where there was a significant amount of historic context that was original to the building and still there and in good shape. So on the right picture, the clear story windows along the corridor are all original. And the wood paneling and glazing separating these two rooms is original to the admin space. It was very carefully removed and relocated a few feet away from where it originally stood. So we were satisfying the historical elements, but also providing the required square footage that was very strictly controlled for the childcare spaces, so we can make those rooms a little bit bigger than they were originally. Go to the next slide. So this is the playground, the preschool playground, looking kind of actually back towards that busy intersection where the playgrounds are originally located. And it's so much brighter and maintenance is easier and it's a much more fun space than it was previously. You can go to the next one. It's the last one, I promise. So this is looking up towards the toddler playground from the preschool playground. So it's the terracing, it's raised up a bit. You can see sort of as a little bit of separation from the sidewalk in the street with the retaining walls, but it also has a really nice connection to the adjacent library, which they sometimes share programs with, and a really nice connection you can see right to downtown Worcester.
Yeah, and this shot would have had a large tree like the last playground, which came down in a storm in the middle of the project. So we do have shade structure there and lots of trees planted in this playground. But from this slide, you can see how embedded, how central this facility is and how important this is to the Worcester, both the city of Worcester and the Worcester region. So with that, I'm just going to give statistic of the project babies, which we had 6 project babies, and we can't quite count all the grandbabies that the owner group contributed to this project. I guess the film industry calls them production babies, but we're calling these project babies. So with that, we are happy to entertain any questions you might have.
It's not a question, but I'm just really impressed by the teamwork on this project. This must have been so great to work through the pandemic with such a great team. It's just amazing.
It was one of the saving graces of 2020 that at least we were with this group.
Yeah, I can feel it when you guys talk about it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I would say from 2017, this project was a great way for us to focus energy and feel like we were able to do something for the community. So this was a delight. And then the construction phase was like no construction project we've ever experienced.
Yeah.
I may have missed this at the beginning, but did you have to do any community charrettes? I know probably with the pandemic it was hard, but I'm curious if it was you were working closely with the owner or with some of the community members as well.
We had the owner interface with the community, had an amazing relationship with the community. Though Linda Cavioli, the person who you saw in the film, is a real superstar in Worcester. And so she had a lot of engagement with the community, and there's a lot of interest in this project. Also, there are a lot of community members on the board. There's quite a large board of trustees for this organization. So I don't remember, we did do presentations to the town and stuff like that. I don't remember any specific community presentations though. Does anyone else from the team remember any? You know, the construction was pretty much contained to the site. Jody, I don't know if you guys had any.
I mean, the only thing I could think of is the event they held for signing of the community benefits agreement. Yep. You know, I think just some of the decisions they made all the way along inevitably integrated the community, which was their goal, right? You know, so to be able to sign the community benefit agreement was to benefit the community of which they serve. So I think they were very strategic all the way along to make, you know, while maybe not doing presentations to the community or things like that, they were certainly engaging them throughout the entire process, whether directly or indirectly.
Well, yeah, thank you. This was a really, really fascinating project to learn about.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions? Feel free to just speak up. I also enjoyed this quite a lot. And I have to say my favorite part was seeing the little original sketches in the sides and then just knowing that you were keeping those in mind as you went through the design. I think that's it really adds a lot.
Yeah, and it was interesting how meaningful they were, how relevant, I should say, they were to this current administration of the YW. You know, they really sort of loved the spirit of the historic, and I hadn't thought about it. They were the ones that gave us the images. They actually, when I went to the interview, I talked about how much I liked the building. And the executive director followed me out. She said, I don't know why you like this building. It's horrible, you know? And so I think we helped them. I think we helped them see sort of the wonderful moments in this building and you know, the special things that the building offered.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give Fennick McCredie credit, you know, where credit is due, because I walked through the building the first time and was just like, oh no, like some of these things have to stay and how are they going to look at the end? And, you know, me, I'm not very creative, right? So I had very low expectations just based on my limited ability to see the potential. But walking through it today is just all those pieces that were staying, those wood transoms, they look exponentially different without doing a whole heck of a lot to them, if anything, than they did the first day that we walked in. So they really did a great job, you know, integrating the historic pieces while bringing the building up to today's, you know, standards and what the YW needed.
Yeah, I do have a brief question, if that's okay. I can say, I mean, first of all, you know, I've been around the Worcester community for a little while, and I know that ever since this project got started, there was a lot of kind of ripples in the air talking about what a great opportunity this was for an entirely sort of women-led, women-controlled team. So I know that that was felt beyond this project itself. I'm really curious about some of the aspects of the building that, you know, are sort of this historic thing that you're stuck with, and how you can reconcile that, because I think there's a great aspects of it from the mid-century part. But one of the things that always seems troubling to me about this building is where it's positioned and how it addresses the street in the downtown. I mean, it sits at a really important connection between, let's say, downtown Worcester and the Canal District. But it doesn't, I think as part of the nature of its mid-century characteristics, it doesn't address the street very well. It doesn't really have a presence there that draws anyone between those two neighborhoods. So I was wondering what kind of opportunities were there to try and enhance those connections between those sort of urban conditions, or if the budget just simply didn't allot for these kind of external ambitions.
Yeah, the budget was certainly a challenge. We did, with the development of the site, have think a lot about its connectivity, especially towards City Hall along Franklin Street, I think that is. And I don't know if the renovations that they're able actually to afford at this point in time, whether any of those connections are going to be made. But we had talked about a shared playground with the library, you know, which is just to the sort of the northwest of the building, and you know, and that's where there was the idea of you have a cat. Hi, cat. Hi, Pen.
Pay no attention to her.
Yes. I'm trying to remember. So yeah, so there was a lot of discussion with the library. I don't know where that ended up landing, you know, when the project got started and we had to go through the VE. But there was the city was going to actually build some of that space, and I think it would be, you know, good to resurrect what we were trying to accomplish there. We were trying to create an entry from that side of Franklin Street into the site before you actually got to that first upper playground, the toddler playground. So there was hopefully there's still promise of creating that shared playground and the kind of connectivity that you would get from that. And I think the other thing we did was reduce the amount of traffic that would go from the site onto Franklin Street, so that there could be safe connectivity between the library and the YW. So that was I would say the big move that we tried to accommodate, and hopefully it will get built at some point.
Great. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for joining us.
Deborah, thank you guys. Great job on the presentation. You mentioned at the end a project statistic about project babies, and I didn't hear the actual number of how many babies.
6.
There was 6. Okay.
I think there were 4. There were 4 from the design side, and there were 2 from the Consigli side. And then Linda has a bunch of grandbabies, and also the one man employed by the YWCA, Rick, who has, I think he had a couple added during the time that we were working on the project.
And it still got done on time, just saying.
The ability to multitask, right? Well, congrats, you guys. The project turned out beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, last call for questions from anyone. Otherwise, this was really great. It's awesome to be able to hear from the construction team as well as the architects. We're at Women in Design at BSA, we're sometimes biased only towards the architects because most of us are architects, but we love involving contractors and CMs that are really share our vision. So thank you, especially to Consigli, and then of course to Deborah and everyone at Fennick McCredie.
Yeah, thank you all for having us.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, and this recording will be up on the BSA, on the Women in Design BSA page. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can email Kaylee and I. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Night, thanks.
Good night.
Hey, all right.
That was great. I love hearing about the construction side, and I feel like I always hear that they're not cooperating. So that was just